What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Fantasy Flex podcast from the Action Network and Fantasy Labs. I'm your host, Chris Raybon. We got another episode today where we're going to talk some wide receivers, some running backs, some best ball. And we got a real special guest. And when I say that, I really mean this is a special guest. I probably wouldn't be sitting here. You wouldn't be hearing me if it wasn't for this guy answering his emails and just being an all-around great human being, but even better fantasy analyst, and I don't say that lightly because he really is a great human being. He's the creator of Late Round Fantasy Football. You can find him at lateround.com. Zachariason. JJ, man, thanks for doing this. How you doing?
I'm good, man. You know, I still tell the story about how at Number Fire, way back in the day, we wrote an article, and Mr. Raybon decides to get enraged from what we wrote, and he emailed me this like legit 15 paragraph response about why the article was trash. And my response to him was, "Yo, you want to just write for the site instead of just emailing us? Why don't you come over here and just write for us instead?"
I did. I absolutely did, man. Actually, I want to say it's probably the only place I ever wrote. I started writing for free there. So that's, everyone talks about grinding, paying your dues. Yeah. This is real life story. But always appreciate you, JJ. And people should definitely check out your draft guide, your prospect guide. I really love it. We're going to get into some of that because I want to talk about on this show specifically some rookies and some year two guys. We'll close it out with that. At running back and receiver, I think that those two positions are very important and kind of hitting on, those guys in your drafts, whether it's best ball, whether it's regular fantasy, are just so important. So we're going to get right into that. Before we do, just want to make sure to remind you, subscribe to the show wherever you get your pods, obviously. And we'll have all of the draft coverage leading up. So, keep it locked here. But most importantly, check out Action Network. .com, check out the Discord, and check out fantasylabs.com. Make sure you download the Action app. All right, JJ, before we jump in, we'll start talking some wide receivers in a second, but I do want to get just the listeners a little bit introed here to your model, because you have a really cool you have a rookie model and a year two model. So let's start with the rookie model. Talk to me about ZAP.
Yeah, so the ZAP model is all about basically allowing you to figure out from a fantasy football perspective. Like, I'm not trying to project where these dudes are supposed to get drafted or where. I only care about how many fantasy points these guys are going to score across the first 3 years of their career. Now, obviously, that's going to correlate to just their rookie season as well. A good player, his rookie season is generally the one who's going to do well the first 3 years of his career. But what the model does, it takes different inputs like production inputs at wide receiver and running back. It looks at draft capital. It looks at player size. There's a teammate score in there, and it puts this all together and it generates a score that then categorizes players in these different buckets of like being an elite producer, flex play, a waiver wire ad, what have you. And it tells you who's going to be the best player, at least forecast and attempts to, who's going to be the best player across their first 3 years of their career. Now, I think the easiest way to sort of describe what the ZAP model is doing is it's trying to tell you when you should stray away and deviate from draft capital. So, draft capital is a very important piece. And again, I'm not trying to solve what's going on before the NFL draft and like where these guys are supposed to get drafted. I'm merely trying to take the inputs that we have and the information that we have to make the best fantasy football decisions. So if you think it's cheating that I'm using draft capital, so be it. But it's really, really predictive. It's front offices and teams that are spending millions of dollars, trying to figure out who the best players are. It's important, but there are players who shouldn't be drafted where they get drafted based on their production profiles, et cetera, et cetera. So I can use sort of these like other metrics that I've created to help, guide me and make the best decisions.
Yeah, and what's really cool, I think, the way you kind of break it down is you've taken the model scores and then you've kind of looked at, what constitutes of, an elite fantasy producer, just kind of your weekly starting guys, your fringe guys, and you've kind of grouped guys into different categories. So I just wanted to start off. Let's just give me a wide receiver, a rookie who you feel strongly about, and we'll kind of go from there. So who you got?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with like, I mean, anyone. Let's just go anywhere. Is that cool?
Anywhere, yeah, anywhere.
Okay.
That's what we
I want to
love.
start with Jalen Knoll,
Okay.
who I don't think is getting quite enough love. If you look at, so I have a metric called breakout score that I created at both running back and wide receiver. And we'll get to the running back stuff in a sec, but the running back model actually doesn't use any rushing metrics in it at all. It's all receiving related metrics. And so what breakout score does is it looks at receiving yards per team pass attempt as a metric, and it adjusts that for program strength and for age. So it age adjusts it, right? Luther Burden has the highest breakout score in this class at 96.3. That's out of 100. And so much of that has to do with the fact that his sophomore season, young age, was incredible from a yards per team pass attempt standpoint. And he did that at a larger program with tougher competition, right? Jalen Knowles is not bad. It's above average, and a lot of his other metrics too, like the wide receiver model looks at rushing production. It doesn't care if it's like 600 yards versus 200 yards versus like 100 yards. But if you get some rushing production, it does bump up a player's score because it shows talent and intent by that team to get that ball, that dude the ball. And so Jalen Knoll has that. He has special teams, which that doesn't go directly in the model, but oftentimes in college, these coaches will give their best playmakers the ball on special teams too. So he has that. And then you look at his profile. Now, he was mostly a slot guy. He played like 2/3 of his snaps out of the slot at Iowa State. But there were some years where his ADOT was like 2.7 yards. There were some years where even last year, he played alongside Jaden Higgins, who is starting to get like early round 2 into round 1 steam a little bit.
Yeah.
And Higgins was their perimeter X. And Jalen Knoll saw more deep targets last year than Jaden Higgins did. So Knoll's been sort of like all over the field, at least out of the middle of the field, out of the slot throughout his collegiate career. So he can project to be a slot dude, but I think there's a little bit more to it. Like I do statistical comps in the model, and the dude that he matched up with closest was Randall Cobb. So think about a player who can do a lot close to the line of scrimmage, can do a lot after the catch. Knoll tested as a phenomenal athlete at the combine, so I think that's going to help his draft capital be there, and he'll be more than likely a day 2 guy. I think there's just a lot to like. Like every single metric is above average for Jalen Knoll. He doesn't, blow us like he's not like out of control. Like blow us out of the water with some of these metrics, but he is above average compared to the rest of the class. And basically everything that I look at, I think the athleticism's there, the ability's there. He's flying under the radar a little bit.
Do you think, as far as Randall Cobb goes, do you think Knoll could have the same type of relationship with Aaron Rodgers and potentially get him to sign with the team?
I mean, it's possible. Like I see Knoll. Like if you want to think about like a high end outcome for Jalen Knoll, like I don't like whenever I look at comps, like for instance, Jalen Knoll's profile in my prospect guide. Yes, Randall Cobb is a top comp, but he also gets like Devin Duvernay because we have to be realistic that this is not all butterflies and rainbows for these dudes. But if you want to think of like a stylistic, how he might be deployed at the NFL level, if everything hits at a super high level, think like Amon-Ra St. Brown in terms of usage. Like that's where things could go if things do hit really, really, really favorably. Now take that a step backwards a little bit, you get more of that Randall Cobb, and then take it back even further, and you get more of that Duvernay, Sky Moore type player, where you get the bust. So we have to be open-minded to that. But yeah, I mean, like any team that needs a slot, Jalen Knoll could play that immediately, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, every team could use a slot because, like slot guys, you're coming in regardless. You're coming in on late downs, and everyone wants that kind of player in this day and age. They want guys that can move around. And right now, he's almost free in best ball. He's going off the board as the wide receiver number at 93, and I'm pretty sure that's going to rise as the draft becomes near. So, or as the season becomes near, excuse me. So, like that, I want to get your opinion, JJ, on a speed guy here who I know your model is actually a little down on compared to consensus. And I think, some other people kind of see it because his ADP is a little bit lower than some of the other rookies, and that's Matthew Golden. He's coming off the board at wide receiver 48 right now in best ball. I actually think that's a bargain. I see the speed, and I think kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, and it goes back to what you were talking about with draft capital, right? Where it's very predictive. And I just see a guy like Golden. I don't see teams kind of passing on his speed. And so I think like his draft capital, his draft stock, his ADP is only going to rise. But curious as to what you think of the player, because I know in your model, there's some concerns, but then like his high end comps are also really, really high. So he didn't have the 1,000-yard season last year. The market share in terms of his team's production wasn't there. So what do you think about Golden as a prospect right now?
Yeah, it's funny. I published the pre-draft version of the prospect guide in early to mid-March, and I'm using projected draft capital for the draft capital input for this, and he's continued to go up since then, right? So I think right now the score in the guide is like an early second or something like that. He's going to go probably mid first, it sounds like, the way things are trending, and so that's obviously going to bump up his score a little bit. But there are concerns. So in the Zap model database, it goes back to 2011. There's been 60 wide receivers, almost 60 wide receivers who hit 14 or more PPR points per game in one of their first 3 seasons in the league. Only 5 of those did that with a best season receiving yards per team pass attempt below 2. Now, people might not have any context for what that means in terms of receiving yards per team pass attempt. Generally, anything under 2 is a red flag. Over 3 is something that we see elite players hit pretty often. So under 2 is where Matthew Golden was. He plays at Houston a couple years, transfers to Texas, didn't really do anything or anything of substance until the final month and a half of that season for Texas. And if you look at the guys who did hit, you get Tyreek Hill out of that group, who was obviously an outlier of a prospect. You get Hunter Renfrow, who only did it once. Like, he had that one good year, didn't do anything after that. Terry McLaurin, Nico Collins, and Ladd McConkey were the other 3. And interestingly enough, Ladd McConkey is Matthew Golden. It's his top statistical comparable. The thing with McConkey, though, that's different than Golden is that McConkey just wasn't used at a really strong. I mean, he didn't get that much usage at Georgia. It was bizarre. But his yards per route run number was really, really strong. It was sort of what we saw from Puka Nacua as well when he came out, where his volume numbers, his receiving yards per team pass attempt, not terrible, but not amazing. But it was his yards per route run. It was basically saying when he was running routes, the dude was balling out, right? And so we saw that with McConkey. We saw that with Puka. We don't get that with Matthew Golden. Like, across the board, Golden's numbers are average at best for a first-round wide receiver. He has a breakout score of 51.4. That's average across all wide receivers, let alone a first-round wide receiver, when we typically see that breakout score closer to 90. And so I do have concerns about his production profile. With that being said, we have to, of course, ground ourselves with draft capital, ground ourselves with the type of player that he is and the type of environment that you're going to be drafting him in. Like, if you're playing best ball, I do think he's probably a, quote, better in best ball type asset than some other guys, because he's going to be able to get down the field and create those monster plays. But I do think that there are, some genuine red flags where we just haven't seen this kind of profile analytically hit in the past, at least very frequently. The good part about what I do with, like, breakout score, for instance, and why it's an okay enough breakout score is because it's adjusted for program strength, and he does get a little bit of a bump in receiving yards per team pass attempt with that. But I think that there are some analytical red flags. And the other thing, I haven't really studied this in detail, but it does give me some pause that this dude, if you look at NFL mock draft database, this dude back in December was like a 5th round pick, right? And then he has, he does what he does in December, January. Then he has a crazy 40 time at the combine. Now he's a mid first rounder. Like, I haven't studied that in enough detail to know if that matters or not. There is a lot of stuff that I have looked at, in terms of mock draft data and how that correlates to NFL success. And, when teams reach, for instance, based on that mock draft data, that's a big red flag, a wide receiver. But at this point, everyone is mocking Matthew Golden as a first rounder and putting him on their big board as, like, the 20th to 30th overall player. So I don't think we're going to be in, like, a situation where they're reaching, but I do have some analytical concerns with them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why, I look for value, right? And I just think when I see, wide receiver 48 this time for a guy like this, because it reminds me a little bit of a guy like Xavier Worthy almost, where it's like, we had a lot of questions about him, his profile, his, what kind of player he was, but the Chiefs took him where they took him, and they forced the ball to him down the stretch. And I just think we're starting to see with these speed guys in particular, it's almost like everything else goes out the window. Teams just know, like teams are just going to kind of manufacture touches for these guys. I mean, you even saw it for a time with Tutu Atwell with the Rams. It's like, and he just re-upped. I mean, for like a 1-year deal, but they paid him pretty decent money. He might start for them. It's like it's like every team just kind of wants a guy like this in the lineup. And so I'm going to ask you for another one, but I just want to get your opinion on his teammate, because I wonder, we talked about Isaiah Bond, his teammate at Texas. We talked about like the receiving yards per team pass attempt, and these two guys, I wonder if they're kind of almost both undervalued just because they both played there at Texas. What are your thoughts on Bond as a prospect? Now he's going off the board a little bit later in both projected real life and in best ball.
Yeah, look, I think from a best ball perspective, just looking at that ADP and seeing where people are drafting them, like, Matthew Golden if we're going to assume he's a mid first rounder, late first rounder, you should be throwing darts at every mid to late first rounder in that range. Like that, of course, right? Like regardless of even what their production profile looks like, you can't get so overly confident in your own ability to scout these guys to think that that's like a bad choice to make, right? I will say though, I think Isaiah Bond is more intriguing at cost, where a lot of people now there are some off the field concerns that I've heard. Steve P and Sam Monson were talking about how there are Jermaine Burton level concerns with Isaiah Bond, which would obviously be a really, really bad thing. But if you look at what he did at Alabama, so he goes to Alabama for a couple of years before transferring to Texas. At Alabama, his stat lines don't look great. 48 catches, 668 yards, 4 touchdowns, nothing special. But if you look at that from a yards per team pass attempt perspective, it's not nearly as bad, especially when you adjust for both age, right? Because he did that as a sophomore, and program, which is Alabama. He has a 77.7 breakout score, which is the 6th highest mark in the class. And a lot of people are going to say like, oh, Bond has a horrible production profile. I'd argue it's better than Matthew Golden's, to be honest with you. Now, what they did at Texas, it sounds like Texas thought that Bond was going to be their dude last year, and then that didn't come to fruition. And then they kind of had that realization halfway through, which is why Matthew Golden did what he did down the stretch. But again, this is a player who has blazing speed. When you're watching them, there was that McShay tweet where he was like, "No one moves like this," and it was a film breakdown of Matthew Golden. And at the top of the screen, Isaiah Bond is literally moving like he's doing, like he's able to get downfield too.
Agreed.
Like Isaiah Bond can move. A lot of people stylistically will say that he's like a Jalen Waddle type getting down the field. His comps weren't amazingly strong. You got Henry Ruggs, John Mechie, Mecole Hardman. That's not what you love to see. But I would argue, before stuff went down with Henry Ruggs, like he was starting to turn around a little bit from a production standpoint. And we know that there was big playability there. And that's exactly what you would be looking for, in like a best ball pick. And Isaiah Bond has that rushing stuff that I was talking about before that I look for with these wide receivers, where it at least shows intent, and it shows that there's a little bit of a talent profile there. So I actually like Bond a little bit more than market. I think both the Texas guys from a redraft perspective are going to be a little bit more attracted to me than from a dynasty one, because I do think there are some red flags that are just analytical profiles in general. But yeah, I mean, I think that when you get, because I think Bond is still going to be a day 2 guy, right? Yeah. And when you can get that kind of draft capital associated with a player who at least can create those big plays, and if things really hit for him, there is that Waddle type ceiling, you go for it.
Yeah. And, I think looking at like Texas, like we talked about Worthy, Texas, also, a couple years ago, Jordan Whittington was on that team. I kind of feel like Texas just like there's these profiles of these NFL receivers that teams want now. And obviously A.D. Mitchell hasn't worked out yet, but I mean, there's some quarterback issues there too. But I think in general, we're starting to see these Texas receivers really kind of outperform their draft capital. So yeah, I'm going to be investing in both, but totally agree on Bond being kind of like a cheaper version of Matthew Golden. Anyone else at wide receiver before we jump to running back?
I think that people should be paying a little bit more attention to Kyle Williams. He's been gaining more steam than I expected. I wrote in the prospect guide, which again goes out in like early March. I said the model's going to like Williams a little bit too much due to him having a reasonable freshman season, but he's not someone you have to go crazy with. But the reason I wrote that is because at that moment, his projected draft capital is pretty trash. Now I'm seeing tweets from people that he might go like that are saying that I saw Hayden Wink send a tweet that they should match him back up with Cam Ward and get him in Tennessee and get him in the second round. And if you're getting round 2 capital from a dude who's an afterthought, you gotta go after that. But the reason why the model kind of likes him more than where he's likely to be drafted is because his freshman season was really strong. He has a breakout score of 78. That's one of the better breakout scores that you're going to find in the class. Now he's a little bit older, and you don't like that out of your wideouts or really any prospect. But I do think that Williams, when you attach the fact that he did have early career production, and you attach that with the fact that he might get better draft capital than folks realize right now, that just comes together and says maybe this dude should be on your radar.
Yeah, and I mean he's really essentially free. I don't think he even has an ADP. So yeah, Kyle Williams, Washington State, definitely a guy to keep your eye on. All right, let's go to running backs, and this position. Real quick, any thoughts on just the position overall? Because I feel like this Saquon Barkley success with the Eagles last year, and this Derrick Henry and to the Ravens, I almost feel like the view of the running back is starting to trickle up again. Do you agree, or do you think it was kind of like a one-off thing?
I mean, I agree that people are viewing it favorably, the running back position, but I also think that it was like a one-off situation with those guys. Like, it's wild to me that people are like, oh, look at how the Ravens were so good and the Eagles were so good. And I'm not saying that like Saquon Barkley didn't play a role, don't get me wrong, but both those teams were really good last year without those guys.
Yeah.
Like situationally, it was a great situation for those backs to get into, and nothing really changed. Like, if they were so impactful, then they would have been so impactful for the teams that they were coming from, and they weren't, right? Because we know that situation, offensive line, environment, scheme, that all matters, and running backs are going to be more dependent on that than some of the other positions in football. So do I think that teams and analysts and such are viewing the running back position more favorably right now? Yes. Do I think it's warranted? I mean, I think that the analytics world probably took it a little bit too far at some points, right? And I even wrote articles about this, and like when Saquon Barkley was drafted, I said that it was a bad draft pick, but I think that it's just somewhere in the middle between where a lot of these takes are.
I mean, yeah, as a Giants fan, a lot of Giants picks have been bad draft picks because it's the Giants. But I do think that because of the view of running backs, and it seems to be ticking up again by NFL front offices and things like that, the positive that I think is coming out of that from a fantasy perspective is that I think this like forced committee thing is going away. It would have like obviously we understand there's a bigger chance of injury with running backs, and teams understand that. Right. But I was happy to see, and we'll talk about this guy in a little bit, but like a Bucky Irving down the stretch, they was like, all right, this guy is amazing. Yeah. We're going to give him 20 touches. Like, we don't care that we have Rashad White here. We don't care that, Sean Tucker went off a couple of days. James Cook in Buffalo, same thing. It was like, these guys are going to get their touches, and they're going to get their goal line touches, and they're going to get their passing down work. So Kyron Williams, guys like so I do think that's one of the positives of teams kind of looking at it like, oh, we don't have to have this committee. We don't have to limit guys unnecessarily. Like if guys get hurt, they get hurt. I think that's ideal for us from a fantasy perspective. So let's just jump right in. Give me your running back. Who you like? Your rookie guy.
Yeah, man, there are so many running backs in this class that are good. I mean, this class legitimately like within my model looks as good as the 2017 class. Like it's really, really good. I'll give you a potential probable day 3, but potential day 2. We'll go with DJ Giddens. So Giddens has good size. And again, going back to what the model is looking at, there are no rushing metrics in it at all. And it sounds really backwards, but the reason for that is, number one, rushing is a little bit more replaceable than receiving is at the position. And so where a guy gets drafted more than likely is sort of baking in his ability to run the football, right? If you get a first round pick, he's going to just see a lot of work on the ground. We know it's going to happen. If you get a day 2 guy, probably will see a decent amount of work too. Day 3, we know that it's likely not going to happen as much. And so a lot of this is captured in draft capital. Size is also one of the inputs. Running back weight, it's one of the inputs in the model. And obviously bigger running backs tend to still see more work on the ground than smaller running backs do. And so what really differentiates a running back from, where they're being drafted or how a team might view them and how we view them in fantasy football is receiving, because I'm measuring this off of PPR production. Receiving is ungodly important at the running back position in any fantasy format, let alone in a full PPR one. So breakout score is actually looked at the exact same way as it is at wide receiver, where I'm looking at receiving yards per team pass attempt. And then I look at reception share as well at the running back position. But DJ Giddens, he has good size, 6 foot 212, nothing wrong with that. He, the combine really, the running backs of the combine this year were awesome. We had a lot of dudes who ran really fast 40s at good weights, had really good speed scores. That's weight adjusted 40 times. And, Bashal Tutin's one that everyone will probably remember because he ran the fastest 40, had the best speed score. DJ Giddens, though, he had a 110 plus speed score. Like he had a really good combine and showing too. He's kind of flying under the radar because there were so many other players who did well. But he had a best season reception share of 11.2%. He had a breakout score of 77.9. And I have this in the guide, and I said, let's have some fun with numbers, because when you do queries, and you know this, Chris, like when you're doing queries of these players and you're only looking and the numbers that you're using are just the baseline numbers from that player, that means that everyone that you're querying, the results are going to be better than that player, hypothetically, right? So if you're looking at like a dude who had 705 receiving yards in the season and 10 touchdowns, and you query all players over 700 yards and 10 touchdowns, all of those players are going to be better than that player that you're querying, right? So take this with a grain of salt. I just thought this was really interesting. There are only 9 running backs in the Zap Models database who had a speed score of at least 110, so they're fast at their size, a breakout score of at least 75, so they had good receiving production at a young age, and a best season total yards per team play rate above 2. So that's not something that's in the model, but total yards per team play, pretty self-explanatory. Those 9 running backs, and DJ Giddens is now going to be part of this, but those 9 running backs are Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott, Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, Breece Hall, and Kenneth Walker. Like, the dude is part of a legit group. I've talked to folks who scout through film a little bit more than I do. They think that he has the ceiling, but definitely has a low floor, really inconsistent from rush to rush. His comps in the model were Cam Akers, Tevin Coleman, and Marlon Mack. So you're not looking at like a sure thing here, right? But I do think there's enough of a ceiling there to be interested. If he does go day 2, which I think is still possible, if he goes day 2, he's going to shoot up draft boards.
Yeah, and he's going off about running back 58 right now. And it's so dependent, running backs are, on landing spot, because there's certain teams where you could just see an easy path to that RB1 spot, even if they start the year as like an RB3 or something like that. So, Giddens is on the radar. And I really like Tutin as well. I just think, he's going even later. He's RB 77, so he's barely getting the look at this point. I mean, I know the speed is there, and I think he'll probably shoot up a bit, but that's kind of what I'm banking on. I don't know where these guys are going to even land yet, and you don't know. None of us know. So I think he's going too low. But you look at his speed score, essentially a 119, best in the combine. I think the concerns, place, like all these little things, they're kind of superficial in a way at this stage in terms of what we're looking for. But I was looking at your model and it actually likened him to like guys like Jarrett McKinnon, but also Kenneth Walker, Jahmyr Gibbs. What are your thoughts on Tutin?
Dude, Tutin is, in my opinion, again, he's sort of in that DJ Giddens mold of like, if he does go day 2, you got to watch out, because I think it's possible after that combine that he does. And there's such a wide range of outcomes for him. He has pretty good numbers. Part of that is from a receiving perspective was he was at NC-A&T to start his collegiate career, and he got, obviously in that kind of environment, he's going to have like a 17-18% reception share. But even at Virginia Tech, when he transferred, he still had pretty good receiving numbers. They were still there. He's a home run waiting to happen. I mean, the dude, he got a Kenneth Walker comp in the model. And I think it actually makes sense. I mean, he's a very similar size. He's got the speed, the home run ability. And, Walker, for as good as he is, his biggest, downfall, if you will, at least what we've seen in the NFL, aside from injury, has just been the inconsistency from rush to rush with him. Like, he's usually a high EPA, low success rate kind of running back. I think that's what we're looking at with Bashal Tutin. Now, another one of his comps is Darrington Evans. So it can go south. Like, don't get me wrong. But in this, again, if like in the RB70s, just chase for the upside. And the upside to me is that if he does go day 2 and he lands on a team that's going to give him a shot, I think that he can definitely take advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, at the RB70 range, even if he goes to the right team as an RB, even if he goes on day 3 to the right team,
sure.
The funny we talk about the inconsistency. 23 catches last year, 81 yards, 3.5 per catch. He had 2 touchdowns. That skews it, but some receptions behind the line. But that doesn't mean much. It's more about the share. I think so. I don't know if that. I don't know why people are this down on him, but anybody else that running back before we go to year two guys?
Yeah, I'll give you a nice little sleeper. Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn. He is the 3rd best breakout scorer in this year's class. It's because his reception share was never super super high. Auburn didn't use him that much as a receiver, but when they did, he had crazy receiving numbers. Like as a sophomore, he had 224 receiving yards. That was on a team that threw it only 308 times. And he was just really, really efficient with his rushes as a receiver. And then you dig into sort of the advanced metrics. He was 5th in this class in career avoided tackles per rush. He was 9th in explosive run rate. He also ran a pretty good 40, and he was 9th in career yards after contact per attempt. So I think Hunter is someone who his top comp was Chase Edmonds, but when you're talking about, and that's more of a realistic one. When you're talking about like a day 3 player, who could make some sort of impact in fantasy football, Chase Edmonds isn't the worst comp in the world when you're, trying to find a player who can maybe fill in for a guy who's hurt or kind of work his way in like a muddy depth chart. I think Jarquez Hunter has juice. I think that he's a really underrated prospect right now. And
another guy who basically is free in best ball right now. So love it. All right, let's talk year 2, because so you have a separate year 2 model but it does take into account still some of the rookie models. So just explain that really quick, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, so basically, like after a rookie season, a lot of dynasty managers or even redraft players are thinking to themselves, like, should I give up on this player after he does nothing his rookie season? So I tested that and I built a model around it. And basically, at running back, for instance, the prospect score, so how they were looked at entering the league, gets a lot more weight. It matters a lot more than what we see at wide receiver, for instance, because wide receiver, oftentimes they're creating their own destiny, if you will, in their own production. They have to get open in order to see targets. And so, like the wide receiver model is way more baked into how they performed as rookies. Whereas the running back model, it does still have more of an anchor and more of a bias towards, how they were as prospects. Right. So I'm just looking at their prospect scores, and then I'm looking at year 1 production, advanced production, per route run numbers at wide receiver, and things like, yards per team pass attempt at wide receiver. And then at running back, you're looking at a lot of receiving metrics and stuff too. And then I'm spitting out a score to see how well they're going to perform then in year 2 and year 3 in their career.
All right. So who jumps out to you? Could be a running back, could be a wide receiver heading into year 2.
Yeah. I think that the wide receiver class at the top is pretty, from my perspective, relatively chalky. Like anyone who likes Marvin Harrison more than Ladd McConkey, I think you're making sort of a mistake. Like I'm pretty much on team Ladd. Just, if you think about it, just like from a ceiling and floor perspective, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s ceiling is probably, like, maybe you want to argue that's a little bit better than Ladd McConkey's, but like it's probably not that significantly better than McConkey. Whereas we know the floor is going to be there for McConkey. And McConkey has a better score within the year 2 model as well. But if you dig deeper and you look sort of in the the lower tiered wide receivers from last year, one guy that really stands out to me, there's actually 2. I'll name a couple. One of them is Jalen Coker, who, if you look at what he did versus the competition on the Panthers, really comparable, a really strong yards per route run rate. Only Adam Thielen was a little bit better than him on that team. And then he blew, he was amazing versus Xavier Legette in terms of yards per route run. And I think the biggest question mark with Coker is he just going to be an inside guy, or can he play inside out? And last year when Thielen came back to the lineup, Thielen started playing the slot, because Coker was playing the slot while Thielen was sidelined. And then Thielen comes back, Coker gets pushed to the outside. His yards per route run wasn't that much worse than what it was when he was playing in the slot. The other thing that was interesting with Coker is I do these things called journey comparables, where I look at players and their ZAP scores, so their rookie scores entering the league, and then I look at their year 2 scores, and I find players in history. They're not stylistically the same necessarily, but players in history who followed the same journey of being X prospect and then Y year 2 player. And his top comp, Jalen Coker's, was Jacoby Myers, which, funny enough, was the exact same comp that Matt Harmon had in reception perception for Jalen Coker. So I think there's at least, a potential for, like a wide receiver 3 type season out of him. We shouldn't ask the world of Jalen Coker, but I do think that there's at least a little bit of juice there. And then the other guy that I should shout out that I feel like is really flying under the radar, and I'm shocked that I'm even talking about this dude, because as a prospect, he was like 26 years old coming out. I wrote him off for sure. But Devon Vele, like, think about it this way. So the Broncos, I think there's a big assumption that the Broncos are going to do something relatively decent at pass catcher, at wide receiver in this draft. Okay. They're definitely going to do something at running back. They've made that pretty clear, but they might do something at wide receiver as well. Number one, this wide receiver class isn't that strong. So I don't know if they're going to get a player who is going to be so substantially better here in 2025 than Devon Vele. And then if you look at Vele and where the situation he's stepping into, he right now is essentially their starting slot, right? They get Evan Ingram, and he's probably going to play that Joker role that Sean Payton loves. But Devon Vele, he wasn't amazing last year, but he had a 1.51 yards per route run. He played out of the slot, like I said, primarily. There's not really a locked-in wide receiver 2 on that team that we feel amazing about, or at least a player who plays the same kind of role that Devon Vele does. So, look, Vele is old. He's a geriatric wide receiver. The dude's already 27 years old as a second-year player in the league, but it does feel like the market is just not caring about the fact that he could be a starter on an up-and-coming offense, and I want a piece of that.
Yeah, and to be fair, I feel pretty good about Marvin Mims. I think he's going to continue that role because, again, these speed guys nowadays. But I agree on Vela. I loved him last year. Obviously not pre-draft, but once the preseason started getting underway and you started hearing more and more about him in camp, the word was really good, and he could just make some of these kind of like almost like a Marcus Colston type of guy for Sean Payton. The Broncos are so unique in that they have these roles for guys that maybe they wouldn't have on other teams. So I think the draft is going to be really important for really both Mims and Vele, obviously, because you already, like you said, you got Evan Ingram, so that could be less targets available for the wide receivers, but whoever, those starters are, I think Bo Nix had a really good season. I think they're going to, and they're willing to pass too. That's another thing about the Broncos. They'll throw. Like
you're talking about, like, I don't mind Mims either, but Mims can play on the outside. Cortland Sutton can play X, and they can have Vele in the slot. And those 3 guys can all, like, versus cost, Vele, he's a complete, like, even in like a dynasty environment, he's a throw-in. Like, no one cares. He's like wide receiver 90. Like, it's a complete afterthought. Whereas, like, you're talking about a dude who could start in the slot with, I like Marvin Mims too, but we also know that he's not a stud right now. And so there's a lot of different directions that can go in. And so what if Vele ends up being more of what if he ends up being a 15-16% target share guy in that offense? I think that's really feasible. And if that happens, you're getting profit on where you're drafting him right now.
Yeah. And, going back to your point on like the Ladd McConkey versus Marvin Harrison thing. Like, I think, a lot of people kind of, debate these kind of things. Like, I think it's preposterous. I mean, we saw a whole year of these guys play. It's like, there's no contest. Right. So I think there's certain guys even at the top of the draft that can be kind of undervalued headed into year 2, just because it's like, maybe there is a little bit of bias still of them, as they were coming into the league, because I think a guy like McConkey, there shouldn't even be a discussion. I think Harrison's going too high. I think Bucky Irving's going too low. And I know he was a guy that, he came as a kind of a hype day 3 guy for some people, but, still a day 3 guy. This guy, we talked about it before, led the league in yards after contact, which is a lot more sticky. Rushing production is going to jump year to year. So a lot is going to depend on the line and how healthy they are in the scheme, and even things like shotgun versus, are they getting most of their opportunities in different, late in the game, early in the game. But Bucky Irving, I don't think there should be 22 players going ahead of him in 2025 drafts. He's going off the board 23rd. He's the RB9. The biggest question is volume, but these are his last 7 games of regular season. 18 touches, 28 touches, 5 in a game he got hurt. 17, 19, 24, 21. So he averaged, even with the hurt game, he averaged about just under 19, and then saw 19 in the wild card round. So it's clear that, they want to give him the ball, and we can't predict injuries. We know running backs are going to get hurt at a higher rate than other positions, but we can't predict who exactly and when. So I really have no concerns about Bucky Irving. And I think he might be an outlier in the sense that, this is not going to be true of all these guys that go off the board in day 3, but there are going to be guys like Alvin Kamara, or even third round guys like Alvin Kamara comes to mind. I think especially when you talk about guys who just, they're not like others, and I think Bucky Irving's one of these guys. So I'm going to be very aggressive drafting him. Any thoughts on him heading into year 2?
Yeah, from a model perspective, like I liked him in redraft and I got him in best ball and stuff, but from a dynasty and modeling perspective, the model didn't like him coming out last year. It was a big miss from the model. And then, like you're saying, he's looking like an outlier. I think he already is an outlier. Like I think that we can already just say this is a player who is not like, other players that we've seen. Like you said, his yards after contact was incredible. He put together a season that we just don't see from day 3 backs ever. So the model doesn't like him as much as it should, in my opinion, is what I'm saying. And then, that's from a year 2 perspective, because the year 2 one is being anchored by the prospect one, and the prospect one wasn't high enough on Bucky coming out. And it was a miss from a long-term, viewpoint standpoint. Thankfully, from like a redraft and best ball perspective, it was a lot easier for me to click his name last year. But I agree. Like I think the only question mark I have is the changing coordinator, right? Like will that impact something? I don't know for sure. No one does. But the thing with undersized backs that you do have to worry about is that at the end of the day, this is a coaching decision with these backs, and some coaches have a bias with the way that they deploy their backs. But since there's still such a consistent environment outside of Liam Cohen leaving, I think that you should feel pretty good about him.
Yeah, because I almost made the mistake, and I'm sure I did. I did make the mistake at times of passing over certain players on the Bucs offense because I was so worried about the guy from the year before leaving, which was Canales, right? And he went to Carolina, and that was a disaster for about half a year, and then things started to turn around. But they just keep pumping him out, and the fact that they're promoting from within gives me a little bit of pause. But yeah, I think I would have been a lot more concerned about that if we didn't see what we did last year with a switch, and because Baker Mayfield was a guy that I didn't get enough of last year. That was the guy where I was like, all right, it's time to draft Bryce Young, and I mean, he came on strong on the stretch, but I mean, Baker was. I thought it was incredible. I thought the Bucs were kind of like a poor man's Detroit Lions, and they still could be heading in that direction. So yeah, I think Bucky's going too low. Lad, agree with you on that one. Marvin too high. Anyone else though? Before we get out of here, year 2 guys that you got your eye on.
Yeah, I'll say this. And so last year's running back class in my models looks like the worst running back class since like 2011. I mean, it's a really, really bad class, right? But I think that the way that we need to like approach the running back position with these guys this year is thinking about, will that team invest in a running back in the draft, right? And so you want to find as much safety as possible, which is really difficult to do because this class is so loaded. And so a lot of these teams who we even think won't be taking a stab will end up taking a stab. There's obvious teams out there. We know Denver probably will. We have maybe Pittsburgh will, whoever. But there are some teams where we feel a little bit more confident they won't. I think one of those teams might be Buffalo. And there's a lot of ambiguity happening with James Cook right now in that contract situation. Now, Buffalo, if they do go out, let's say they get, because to me, Travion Henderson's like top comp is James Cook. Like they're a very, very similar prospect. So like if Buffalo goes out and they draft Travion Henderson and try to trade James Cook or something, which I don't think is like that bonkers of an idea, obviously this, he would then fill that role, and Ray Davis, who I'm going to talk about here, would, basically keep a similar role. But like, I still think that there's plenty of upside for Ray Davis to see work in that offense. Last year his numbers looked pretty decent. He was a pretty solid prospect coming out versus where he was drafted. But he right now in the year 2 model, it's Bucky Irving at RB1 in the year 2 models. This is all guys who came out last year. It's Tyrone Tracy at RB2. And then there's just this massive, and Ray Davis is sitting there at RB3 in the year 2 models. So I think given the fact that they're not investing, or they may not invest at the position, maybe something weird goes on with James Cook and he wants to hold out or something. Like there's outs for Ray, and obviously injury, right? Like just handcuff upside. Like there's some outs for Ray Davis, and he showed big playability last year, and his journey comparables are kind of interesting too. You get Roshan Johnson. Okay, that's not that great. But you get Devontae Freeman, who obviously, came on, early in his career. And then Chuba Hubbard was another one. So I'm intrigued enough to throw that dart. We'll say that.
Yeah. And, Buffalo really is a team. I mean, they want to run the ball. And I mean, they showed that in the playoffs, down the stretch, even in the regular season, where you had Josh Allen in the MVP conversation, and they threw when they had to. But for the most part, that offense was built around the running game. So, yeah, I think it would probably take the real thorn in Ray Davis' side is probably, I mean, obviously James Cook is ahead of him. That's going to happen when you're a year 2 guy sometimes. But it's really just how well Ty Johnson has played.
Right.
As it's like, Jesus, Ty Johnson. I mean, that catching against the Broncos in the playoffs, and then he read up for a small contract. So
right.
He's probably going to be there. But that, like you said, that also means Buffalo likely not to invest in a running back. So yeah, it's kind of reminds me of the situation with the Jets where it's like they have 3 guys, and I think right.
Sorry, that was another dude. I could have brought Isaiah Davis up too.
Yes,
yes. Davis was. If you look on a per rush basis, Davis was the best Jets back last year, just in terms of like per rush efficiency and stuff. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, but like Braylon Allen. I feel like, do you agree that people have like a crazy anchoring bias with Braylon Allen?
Yes.
Because he was not good last year. He had no burst. Like there was not a lot going. Like when you look at his season long numbers, he just started off really hot, and people kind of just like anchored to that and thought that he was like better than Breece Hall. But I'm not surprised that there's talk about the committee. I even said it in the guide that I wrote Isaiah Davis's blurb up in February, and I said we could see a clean slate approach because of the new coaching staff, and maybe they do run more of a committee. And Isaiah Davis was someone that I liked a lot as a prospect. Now he's stepping in. He could be part of a committee. Maybe we'll see. But, I'm all about throwing darts at talented players.
I totally agree. That's exactly where I was going to go. I was about to say, like, if we're going with a Davis in a 3-way backfield, I almost like Isaiah even more, just because, I think the thing about Braylon Allen is another thing that really helps Davis is that Braylon Allen is not your typical passing down back, right? So if Breece Hall were to go down, and we saw this even at times last year, Isaiah Davis got a lot more work than than was projected by the betting markets, the fantasy community. I totally agree on that. I'm looking at Isaiah Davis as well. This was great. That's going to wrap it for us here on the Fantasy Flex. JJ, once again, thank you so much for coming on, and plug whatever you got going on, where people could find you for all of your great work.
Yeah, man. Over on lateround.com, you can check out the prospect guide. It's for sale right now, and I will be updating that guide the final night. You'll get an update the final night of the NFL draft, so you can crush your rookie drafts right away.
Yeah, and it's really great, and you can write, man. That's what I'm seeing the word cognizant in there. I'm like, oh man, this is not AI. Yeah, like, man, but seriously, it's great stuff. And we are thankful as a community to have you as a part of it. So everybody make sure you go check out lateround.com. Check out JJ on X. He's at LateRound2B. I'm at Chris Raybon. This has been the Fantasy Flex Podcast. Don't forget fantasylabs.com for all of our fantasy football content. Until next time, let's get this shmoney.